Hello, everybody. I'm Carol Stone, co-chair of this meeting, and my co-person is next to me on the screen, Jeanette Zernicke. And we are thrilled to start this year, not calendar year, but seasonal year, school year, season of our environmental concern speaker series with Jim McGrath. Jim was a former Parks Waterfront commissioner, and then he was appointed to the Waterfront Commission in 2005. He has been a longtime user of the Park Marina as a windsurfer, as you could see you could see him in a boat on the picture that we sent out, where he's pictured with Sylvia McLaughlin, who is a longtime member and friend of our league. And then after that, he in 2013, he became the Waterfront Commission combined with the Parks Commission, and Jim was the very first head of that. And so we're going to be talking about Therese is having trouble checking in. If somebody, Linda, or if somebody could call Therese and help her sign in, that would be great. So he has.
I don't know Therese. I can't.
Okay,
I don't know who Therese.
Call her. Therese Pipe. Jeanette, can you call her or email her how to get in?
I'm not sure if I can get to. I have to get where I can find the email for her.
What's on the league site? At any rate, Jim is has an engineering degree from Cal in coastal and hydraulic engineering and a background in water quality chemistry. So he was until recently chairman of the Regional Water Quality Control Board for San Francisco Bay and served for more than 15 years on Berkeley commissions, including the Waterfront Commission and the Parks and Waterfront Commission, serving as chair of both. He ran this successful campaign to increase the parks tax, which was Measure F, and the infrastructure bond.
Hey there, I'm here. I think Mark is upstairs.
Measure TI. And anyway, he is very well suited to talk to us about what's going on at the marina and what might be the plans and what state they're in regarding ferry service to San Francisco from the marina. Jim.
Thank you, Carol. I appreciate being invited to be here. It's nice to see some familiar faces. It's nice to see some new faces. It takes a lot of people to do things in this world. Now you all know that I can't hold a job, and my retirement has not been any more successful than my employment. So I've been around. I'm going to talk to you about the marina first, because I think you need a context for that, and then the ferry. And we didn't do a trial run on sharing screens, so I'm just going to go ahead and see if I can do it. I got to put everything away except, oh, come on. What did it do? I've got now a blank screen there at the bottom. Files. All right, can you see my screen?
No. Yeah.
Is it shared? That's beyond my skill level. David, can you see my screen?
No.
So you have to give me permission, I think, to share screen. But certainly
anyone attending a league meeting can share their screen. What I just did was I made you a co-host just to put an extra layer of just privilege that you now have. But there's there's nothing prohibiting you from sharing your screen. If you'd like to email a PowerPoint so that it can be shared in a different way, that's possible if you're unable to share your screen.
I don't see the command for share screen. And
Bottom.
It's green at the very bottom. You should see mute and share video.
Yep.
And share screen. It's a green button at the very bottom.
If it's an iPad, it's at the top.
all right, okay, I
Oh.
see it.
I see. It's an iPad. Great.
So now I have to find on that screen. There it is.
All right.
Perfect.
Got it.
Can you see my screen?
We can.
Yes, we
All
got it.
right. I'm not particularly adept at these things. I can windsurf, I can paddle. Saving the Berkeley waterfront again, and Willow Ferry Terminal help. There's a reason I started with Sylvia McLaughlin. She was a great mentor to mine. You can see her and the smile on her face. You can probably see the smile on my face. It was part of each of our bucket lists. It was quite a while ago. This was in the South Basin, and I wanted her to see what the bay looks like from my perspective. And it was indeed one of the wonderful things of my life. It wasn't the only interaction I had with her. She was a great mentor. She had a spirit. Nothing that happened with her was an accident. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I'm going to start with an old photo. I don't have the date on this one, but you can see the Berkeley Pier. You can see the arrow. That's the Berkeley Pier. You can see the starting of the Berkeley Marina there. You can see the old rail mole. This is before the Bay Bridge. And you see the linear shoreline. So this is before the fill for Emeryville, the Bay Bridge and the other things. And you can see the highway along it. So I wanted to get you oriented at the very start that everything that we're talking about is out in the bay. Now this is the current marina and the area in question. This is, of course, Berkeley's largest park, Cesar Chavez. There's a small park there. There's another park there. This is the area proposed for a marina and for a parking for a marina. It was filled with Sylvia's support. There is another small park here. Now, oh my God, how do I get? So I just moved. Just a brief history. The area that I just showed you is water in this picture. You can see the pier, you can see University Avenue, and you can see a very small marina there. I believe Paul Kamen used to come in, or once came in on the helipad there. This is
Only once. First time
Only
I
once.
set foot in Berkeley was getting off that helicopter.
I was certainly around, but I never had the money to do that. So Berkeley Marina was built as a WPA project in 1936. This picture is from 1959, before the film. Marina slips were built in 1960, so they're kind of old in the tooth. My first visit to Berkeley was actually as a freshman at Cal in 1968 in the spring. So they were all pretty new. There wasn't much vegetation. In 1986, and that's an important day, there was a huge battle over development, and it led to the voters adopting limits in 1986. That was the first Measure L. The area where a ferry terminal is now proposed was filled for recreational purposes, for recreational use under a BCDC permit in 1972. Unfortunately, it's now being used as a corporation yard by the city, which is in a violation of their permit. to go forward. So what are the current threats to Berkeley Marina? First of all, there's a structural deficit. It's pretty large. It's $800,000 to $1.5 million a year. The estimates have kind of bounced around in the last 6 months. Why do we have that? Well, that's not the only issue. The second issue is while the marina was essentially built as the modern facility you can see in the 1960s, it was ignored as an infrastructure, as an asset. No money was put aside for replacement or repairs. And the current estimate is about $115 million of infrastructure, which is deteriorated. And I give you my source there. The third problem is the city has made a practice of charging parks maintenance, and that's now in this year $1.6 million a year, and recreational programs $550,000 a year to the Marina Fund. Now, those are both consistent with the public trust, so it's not illegal to do that. But that's about a third of the total revenue in the marina. And because of that practice, which has been going on for about 30 years, no capital has been accumulated. When we turn to the site that I pointed out where a ferry is proposed, that of course has at least some revenue potential and some recreational parking. All of that will be lost if a ferry terminal is built. Boy, these things keep pocket. What's broken? Well, these are just the big pieces of that $115 million. Berkeley Pier, $37 million to rebuild. The city has not been putting money aside for that, which is why I started a group called Save the Berkeley Pier. D&E docks, those are price tag on that's $5.5 million. The original wood pilings are finally being replaced, somewhat slowly. That's $3 million. The parking lot surfaces, most of the lots have basically gone to gravel. Seawall Drive and the revetment, J-Dock. And then, of course, what a marina in shallow water needs is some dredging. So neither the marina or the South Basin, both of them need dredging. It's been more than 20 years since it's been dredged, and it's got a cost of about $10 million. No money was put aside over the last 20 years for that. Then there's a harbor basin revetment, $3 million. And then there's the old His Lordship's, which has been vacant now for 5 or 6 years. And while there is some potential to release that and begin to generate revenue again, there's a $5 billion repair tag. So if you're lucky and get $500,000 a year, you're still not going to get any net money on that for 10 years. So why is this? Well, Berkeley is old-fashioned in some ways. The changes in fiscal management and the changes in management styles, such as total quality management, kind of passed Berkeley by. Berkeley Marina and all its parks are, in fact, recreational financial assets. They add value to the homes around them. They provide recreational opportunities, which most public works projects value the given assessed value of the value it provides to people today. Berkeley doesn't manage their system like that. We don't know what the exact value of the marina. I asked the head of the Parks and Recreation, and the idea of what the value of the asset was kind of bewildering to him. But if you think about it, still functioning, yet it's got $115 million in repair needed, gives you some idea that this is an asset worth 200, 300 million, perhaps. But it's not being managed to maintain that value. It's a recreational asset for hundreds of thousands of visits. The city hasn't looked at that. They've not made any estimate. They haven't put a counter out there to figure out how many cars are there. I've been the person that's been sending them pictures of who's parked. Within the marina, the DoubleTree Hotel generates $2.2 million in lease payments each year. That's in a good year. That's the best lease that we have in the marina. But it generates more than twice that much in the transitory overnight tax to the city. So that can legally go out of the marina, and it does. But the city, in its processes, did not realize that sustaining that means sustaining the marina. Uh-oh, it went forward. That was probably operator error. And this is the practice that despite my efforts, I've really not been able to figure out until fairly recently. In 2023, boating facilities contributed 67% of the marina fund revenue. It's a lot. That's 2/3. But not all of that went to maintaining and repairing the boating infrastructure. About $1 million went to recreational programs, staff salaries, and the like. So that's the process that has kind of dug the marina into a hole. And because it's been going on for more than 25 years, that's enough money to dredge and upgrade infrastructure in the marina.
Yeah.
So the city just released today, late, and I haven't had a chance to look at it, the draft of the waterfront specific plan, finally. Can new development help? Well, a little, but not right away. As I pointed out, Seawall Drive needs $5 billion in immediate work, which means you don't get any revenue from that for years. That's a pretty large site, 3 years. Doubletree is a pretty lucrative site. It occupies 13.8 acres. There's no other site in the marina that is that large. Berkeley has restaurants, and there's potential for restaurants, but one of the problems in releasing his lordships is Berkeley is a restaurant-rich city, and most of them are in neighborhoods. They're not destination, and no one has ever thought that the food at his lordships was good enough to make Berkeley a destination. Maybe the bar and for the view. The hotel industry, and there's potential for hotels, but nothing as large as the existing hotel, is still recovering. It's years away. There's still deals being cut and hotels being given back to the lenders. So there's no money, that the cavalry's not coming from that area. New development would also displace development that's now paying rent. There's a boating repair facility. There's a launch ramp. There's dry boat storage. All of those things generate rent. And it's very clear that even intensive development of that cannot only not recover the existing deficit, it won't pay for any new infrastructure. So now we come to a ferry. Would a ferry terminal help? The answer to that is an overwhelming no. No one wants to admit that. I mean, ferries are cool. They're romantic. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I love taking my kids on a ferry. It's not a business plan, though. The construction cost for the ferry, 2017, was estimated at $121 million. Where's that money coming from? That's not all. The WEDA, which is the Waterways Emergency Transportation Authority, just released their plan for the next 5 years. And it indicated that to operate a marina terminal, a ferry terminal in Berkeley, would cost $9 to $12 million in subsidy. The frequently asked, the city claimed when it started all this, the operating cost of the proposed new ferry will be funded by passenger farers, funding from WEDA, and Measure 3. No funds will be required from the city to subsidize operation. WEDA thinks it's assumed that Regional Measure 3 would cover approximately half of the capital costs, with the remainder covered by the other local funding sources. Of course, WEDA has only budgeted $30 million for the construction of the terminal. Let's go back up to the top, $121 million. Berkeley has already indicated to WEDA and in contracts and an agreement that they will fund all recreational features. That's at least $29 million. You'll notice that's just about enough to fix the pier. Isn't this going forward? So ferries in the Bay Area are like that. They're like that in other cities, but not quite so much. Here's the fare box recovery for 2022 and 2023. This comes directly from WEDA's documents. Seaplane Lagoon, new ferry over there in Alameda, gets 20%. Arbor Bay Isle, long-time favorite, 17%. Alameda, Oakland, one of the two more successful ones. I actually got permits for that when I worked with the Port of Oakland. 23%, Vallejo, 26%, South San Francisco, 7%, Richmond, 11%. So over each dollar a passenger Richmond pays for their fare, you and I pay 9. And who gets this? Riders, 70% of whom make over $100,000, 30% make over $200,000. The cost, let's look at what they thought they were going to get out. The feasibility study assumes 950 departing passengers. That's $127,000 per seat for each departing passenger. In my snarky moments, I say we could buy each of one of those passengers Tesla. That's not really good economics, but it's a good talking point. Other ferry issues, parking. WIDA has asked the city for 250 parking spaces, but their plan now forecasts 2,000 unique passengers departing from Berkeley. Now, I'm an engineer. I do a lot of math. I teach it to first graders. I teach it to fifth graders. I know that 2,000 doesn't go into 250 parking spaces. I'm not sure where politicians get their math lessons, but it's not going to work. It will take up every single recreational space. Berkeley's feasibility study, where they said, well, we'll look at how we can do that. Well, how'd they do it? Well, they didn't take the 2,000, they took 950, and then they cut it in half, and then they cut it in half again. So they looked at 250 parking spaces for 447 departing passengers instead of 2,000. And what should scare you about the planning process is nobody picked up the error. Nobody picked. 3 years ago, that study was done. Finally, after I filed multiple public records requests, it was finally put up on the Berkeley. And I get to that and I say, and nobody noticed the mistake. It requires a new fill for wave protection. 250,000 cubic yards of dredging is required for some of the options. It's a short fishing pier. The anglers that have been polled by Camille Antonori in our group don't think it's work. They think it'll the ferry activity and the length will work against it. The only current technology which is able to meet the turnaround time that they've insisted on, diesel ferries. That's what their fleet is. They finally agreed to put diesel particulate filters on the exhaust if the air district gave them a grant to do it. But there's, while they'll talk about a electric ferry, there's no electric ferry that can make it. And then there's a daunting gauntlet of permit issues with organized opposition. And you probably figured out right now I'm part of the organized opposition. So I'm going to give the last word to Carol Denny. I had the good fortune to be able to play some music with her yesterday. She's a longtime friend, plays a spectacular fiddle. She does some cartooning. You probably all know of her. So this is her last word. Shouldn't our berth rents go into marina maintenance? Oh, that would too much sense. $1 million last year. That's what they took. All right, I'm done sharing. I hope it's been both informative and a little bit snarky for you. So I'm not going to hide my bias here, but I'm going to do my homework. Thank you. I guess it's time for question and answers. Rebuttal.
I have a comment. It's just anecdotal, but the restaurant that was there, the league used to hold and stopped years ago an annual luncheon, and it was always held at that restaurant that closed down at the marina.
So was the Education
Second
Foundation.
floor, it was, yes, and the Education Foundation had theirs too. It was a beautiful venue. And the food was decent. It was pretty good. I miss those days. Nancy.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jim, for reinforcing with a lot of data my initial belief that the parking for a ferry would totally obliterate all other parking for all other recreational uses. So, I love ferries, but they're not practical and they make no sense for Berkeley. And I agree with you.
Well, thank you. I think you realized you reached that decision on your own, and I just reinforced it. I
Yeah,
suspect.
no, that's true. But looking at the space we have for parking, whenever there's something going on at the marina, or like when we go to take a walk down there, it's hard to find a parking, and that's without a ferry. So with a ferry, how could it work?
It's absolutely true, Nancy, and the work that was done for the marina study was unfortunately very poor, as was the original work by Guida 13 years ago. I've taken pictures on every Saturday and Sunday that I've been down there where the parking lot was full, and I send them to the city, and it's, they're date stamped, they're time stamped. Saturday, there were no parking spaces to be had. And so there are 200 recreational spaces in the South Basin, and they support fishing, they support water sports, they support learning, to the kids' educational programs, the summer programs. They're all occupied. Not all the time during the weekday. They're about 80% occupied. That's what would end. I see Kelly's hand. Kelly, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. So I was going to ask you to mention the ridership on the ferries. That when I look at their WIDA statistics, the Water Emergency Transport Authority, is that on the busiest hour of the day, the average is only about 33% to 36% full, which means that most of the time when ferries are going back and forth across the bay, they're largely empty. Do you have any comment on that?
I do. I have been a pain in the side of the city on this. I've submitted probably at this point about 12 Public Records Act requests. Berkeley approved 2 small ferry operations, one for Prop SF and one for what is it? The Tideline. And so I've requested information on their ridership, the cost to serve, and the mode split. They're claiming that they can prevent people from parking, but everybody comes down there that rides the ferry pretty much parks. So after 6 months, the city finally gave me these sheets, which I have not been able to completely decipher. They have such things as 30 passengers, 43 passengers. It's not clear for what period of time. So the city doesn't really want you to know. When they approved those 2 small operations, they actually approved them after hours. They didn't send them to the Parks and Waterfront Commission for comment or review. They didn't make CEQA findings. They basically hid the ball. And when I found out about it, it was 30 days. It was too late to litigate under CEQA. Nevertheless, it provides, I think, an answer to Kelly's question. How many people are actually interested in using it? I was windsurfing today in Berkeley Marina, and I saw one of the ferries come in. There were 4 people on the afterdeck.
So when you look at the parking, then how does 2,000 passengers fit if the ferries are largely empty? I mean, this, as you said, the math just doesn't work.
Well, the thing you have to do if you're like me, a park person, I've built parks, I've been on park commissions and the like, you have to hope that it's a failure. But the consequence of a failure is the subsidy is immense. In 2022, 2021, the cost per passenger, the subsidy per passenger was $137. That's each way. So the good news is if they're not really used, you'll still be able to go to the marina. The bad news is you'll have to pay $250 or so for people to cross the bay, those that do. So, and if it's successful, and it's an operation that has huge fixed costs, relatively small marginal costs. If it's successful, there's no parking, but the subsidy goes down. But there's still a big subsidy there. I don't like either one of those options myself.
We have a question in the chat
I'd
from
like to
Elsa.
ask a question first, if that's okay. Have you looked at the difference between what they're talking about for Berkeley and what they already have in Oakland? There's a lot of people who take ferries to work from Oakland, as far as I can tell.
I know that project because I worked as the environmental manager for the Port of Oakland, and one of the projects they gave me in about 1992 or 93 was to get permits for the ferry terminal. I used to sit out in front of it at lunch and play guitar out there. So I know the ferry terminal pretty well. All of the ferry systems before the pandemic generated a little more than 8,000 daily passengers. That's about 2% of what crosses the Bay Bridge. Now they're down to about 6,000. The two most successful are, and I think that showed in the PowerPoint with their fare recovery, are Vallejo and Oakland. Oakland actually stops at Alameda too. And I've taken that ferry. I took my grandkids to see Santa Claus once. So, it's the subsidy is still 3/4 of the cost.
So it's not a very lucrative operation.
It's not. And the other thing that I would say about the Oakland operation, since I was at the Port of Oakland for quite a while until about 2005, I think, and it gradually built up use, but still it's a boutique use. I mean, there's no other way to say it.
Okay, question in the chat, and then Emily, and then Nancy Bickle. The first one is from Elsa. Do the cruise boats pay rent? To whom? And does the city collect market rate rent from the DoubleTree?
Good questions. The cruise boats do pay rent. Not every one of the larger boats pays what you would think of as market rate rents. I don't know off the top of my head what those revenues are. I do know that the Port of Oakland tried to poach the hornblower yachts, and the kind of revenue was pretty small. Just to give you a context, the total marina budget is about $6.5 million. So there's no way that it can generate $6 million in subsidy for a ferry. 2/3 of that comes from the boating facilities, which are not maintained, and because of that has gone down. DoubleTree generates about $2.2 million in leases. That lease agreement was renegotiated in the last couple of years. I think the city did a pretty good job in those negotiations. They not only got a pretty good lease that I think is comparable to other facilities, but they got an offer from the DoubleTree, which generated, I don't remember the number, but it was a $2 or $3 million number, I think, to rebuild University Avenue. So they were very interested in getting that done, and they got a really nice improved road right to their facility. So so I think the city gets a pretty good deal with the DoubleTree. I think it more than covers their expenses. Trouble is that $4.5 million of that goes uptown.
Emily, you had a question before, do you? Unmute.
Yeah, it was sort of a kind of a bit of a devil's advocate because I agree with you basically, but back when the original ferry went, people didn't have cars and they took public transportation down to the ferry. And I'm wondering if included in this plan, if they had talked at all about rather than having parking, of having a somehow a basic public way to get out to the ferry.
You know, they just, I've seen and read all the draft studies on transportation and split. And like I said, they used the wrong numbers and they thought that they could get the number of people parking down to 60% or so. So, you know, with 2,000, that would be 1,200 parking spaces. One of the things that not many people realize is I think the ferry that went to San Francisco from the long original Berkeley Pier only ran for 13 years. It was a very short period of time, and people don't like it. We just got pretty good recovery rates on their facilities. It's up to about 60%, 80% of pre-pandemic numbers. But the way they did that is they lowered the fares so that they could compete directly with BART. And the conversations that they've had at the board are fairly clear that they realize that there's a huge amount of price elasticity there, that it's somewhat less convenient for a lot of people than BART, but it's a more pleasant ride. But they know what that price elasticity is. They're not telling us. So did I answer your question thoroughly enough?
But there's been interesting, it only ran 13 years. Was this before the bridge was built?
Yeah. Yes, the bridge basically poached all that traffic.
Yeah.
So somehow I had the opinion, I thought that the long pier was also used to put on train cars to take across to the city.
I don't know that. I mean, you know, I looked at all the old trestles in the Port of Oakland because that was kind of my business. And there were certainly all those routes were at one time train facilities. So there were trains to the Oakland Mall. I don't know that the same's true. There's no indication that the pier itself was sufficient to hold a train. But Berkeley had the red line. I don't know exactly where the red line went then.
Well, I don't know, but I think that where I live up in the Berkeley Hills, and there were a lot of small trains that came through. You know, if you look at the Solano Tunnel, that was one of the train routes, and there was another one that came down from Euclid, and all these things. And I thought that some of that was coordinated such that they could have a route that went down to the pier and just put a small cart on a boat and let it across back and forth. But that's sort of what my husband says, and he was living there at the time, so I don't know if that's true.
It's a good question. I don't know the answer for sure one way or the other. I see Carol Denny's comment that there was a trolley. Carol?
Yes, maybe that's what people are thinking of. There was a trolley on University Avenue that took people down to the ferry.
Right.
It would be interesting to see what the ridership was because Berkeley was a much smaller town at that time. I see Claudia. I'm going to just go with what I see on our screen. Claudia, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to make a comment or reply to a lot of our policymakers who believe that the ferry is going to be the godsend when we have our next earthquake.
You know, I worked in San Francisco during the Loma Prieta earthquake, and it was my first day with contact lenses. I was stuck on the San Francisco side with contact lenses in. So it's very memorable. Buses got us home. So the thing that I realized, having been in the maritime business for a long period of time, is there's a lot of service boats that serve the bay. There's 100,000. The total traffic on the bay is 100,000 vessel calls. That's what it was when I worked for the Port of Oakland, because I looked into these things. Most of those, only about 4,000 of those are big ships. The rest are small. That's who did the emergency response. Everybody turned to Blue and Gold and Red and White Fleet offer passenger service. As far as delivering supplies, you don't do that on a passenger ferry. You do that on a working boat. There's barges. So the story behind how WIDA became an emergency has to do with a man by the name of Ron Cowan. Ron Cowan developed an industrial park on Bay Farm Island, the last bit of fill in San Francisco Bay before BCDC began to control that. And it wasn't successful. He wasn't renting all the space. So he decided that a ferry would be. In about 1985, he started a ferry service. Well, it didn't fill up his office space, and it was costing him some money. So he went to his lawyer. You may have heard of his lawyer, Willie Brown. So Willie said, well, we can't have Ron Cowan pay for that ferry. Let's have the public pay for that ferry. So he added emergency to the name, and lo and behold, you and I are now paying for what Ron Cowan started. No, it's a trivial amount of emergency response if you look at the numbers. But politicians don't look at the numbers. Linda Carruthers.
Yeah, you in talking about the Bay ferries, maybe I missed it. You didn't mention the Larkspur ferries.
I didn't.
And because it seems there is an attempt to, and they connected with the rail that's going north. The new railroad line that starts at Larkspur and goes
train.
north. Yes, the smart train. And
you don't want to look at the subsidy levels on the smart train. So there is indeed a ferry there. One of the sources that I've used is an article in the East Bay Times that talked about the level of subsidy, and I'll pull up the name in a minute. The cost for that was even higher for that, which surprised me. I mean, I've started looking at this when I started looking at this when WIDA first proposed a ferry, and initially I thought that was kind of a cool idea. And then I looked at their plans, and they didn't realize that Berkeley's designated a park by BCDC. There are parks there and has other recreational uses. So I haven't spent a lot of time doing investigations. Eliyahu Kamisher did an article, and you can find it in the East Bay Times. It's dated September 13th, 2022. The subsidy for this Larkspur ferry was even greater. And of course, that ferry terminal was built in a marsh.
Yes.
Paul Kamen. You got to unmute, Paul. Paul, you got to unmute.
Oh, that's odd. Usually
It's okay.
Usually the space bar unmutes, but I was typing, so the space bar did something else. I just wanted to mention that it was the number 7 Arlington that came down Arlington Avenue and went through downtown and out all the way to the end of the pier when it was 3 miles long.
It went out to the end.
Yeah, and people have said that If you live near that Arlington route, the door-to-door time to get to San Francisco was much faster than what we have today with BART. Also, for the emergency utility, first of all, our access road is subject to liquefaction, so we don't know which WIDA terminals might be accessible after a big earthquake. And if it's a fire scenario, we'll need to get fire trucks and ambulances across the bay. So a vehicle ferry is much more in line with the emergency scenarios than a passenger-only ferry. And in non-emergency mode, vehicle ferries have some intriguing possibilities with bus routes, where the ferry could take the bus from one side of the bay to the other, and you could have a zero transfer commute from high in the Berkeley Hills to somewhere deep in San Francisco. But my general comment, my prejudice is the opposite of Jim's. I start with being prejudiced very much in favor of ferries. My background is a naval architect. My training is ship design. I love ferries, but I come to exactly the same conclusions as Jim. This will be a disaster at the scale it's proposed. I would love to see a boutique ferry charging market rate with no more subsidy than any other modes. Even if I only take it once a year or once every 5 years, having that small scale ferry option will improve my quality of life in maybe not a measurable way, but in a way that I could sense. But WIDA is just completely off base with their scale and their financing, and I think we have to kill this thing as fast as we can.
Let me bring in some of the things that are in the chat that were raised. One is a question, can you show again the slide with the subsidies information? And then to extension of that, and the one before is, how do we stop the project? How do we stop this subsidies? And that ties in with what Paul just said also. I think this is it. Yeah.
So this is the slide that shows the subsidy. The costs for 2023, I'll give you the raw numbers because they stick out in my mind. The overall cost to run the ferry system was 62 million. This is just WIDA and no Berkeley route, was 62 million. They got 12 million in revenue, and they needed $50 million in subsidy. The idea that the regional measure 3 will pay for the subsidy is not well founded. Total amount of operational subsidy in regional measure 3 annually is about $30 or $35 million. So they were covering that before the pandemic. They've muddled through the pandemic with the federal subsidy, federal COVID relief subsidy, but there's no way that they can expand with the existing system. There is rumor that there will be a 2026 proposal to increase the bridge toll yet again. Okay.
So the follow-up question is several people asking what, and someone said, what tactics should we use and what can we do about this? And how far along is it? Can it be stopped? And if that's the right thing to do because of subsidies?
Well, the city has not yet adopted a plan that allows this. And one of the things that I was successful in a number of years ago, I think it was about 2006, working as a board member on the San Francisco Board Sailors Association, is we work with the BCDC staff and we put in place policies. And the policy basically says, I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty close. You can consider a ferry in a waterfront park, and BCDC has designated all of Berkeley Marina waterfront park. You could put one in, provided that it does not usurp recreational parking. I don't believe there's any way that finding can be made. But I'm a former BCDC commissioner. I'm no longer a BCDC commissioner. I know what happens when the governor calls. I know very well what happens when you don't do what he asks. So I am no longer on the Regional Water Quality Control Board for exactly that reason. So the policy is fairly clear, and these guys are kind of ham-handed. Before there's an EIR, they've said, oh, well, really, where it's not 950 passengers, really it's 2,000. And the data that the city's used for successful diversion and using parking management says, yeah, well, maybe you can get 40% to not drive. That's still 1,200 spaces. There's no way that fits. So I've settled in for the long fight. There's also permits required for every stage. I would love to have the League of Women Voters on my side. But I'm going to fight this.
Let me ask you a totally different question, if it's okay, but related to this. Is it possible to dredge to the south near where Seabreeze Market is and along there, so that parking is there and the road and parking that goes out to water, to the park, to the actual Berkeley Marina would not be affected by all the traffic? The traffic would be close to being right off Highway 80 at University Avenue. Is that even possible?
Well, right now, the Seabreeze is part of the East Shore State Park. And of course, that's named after Sylvia McLaughlin.
Right.
And so any parking would take that. The story with dredging, and I did this for 16 years at the Port of Oakland. They were stalled on dredging, and that was my job for a long time. And that's why my hair's all white, I got to tell you. But if you go into more shallow water, you generate a lot more mud, so the costs go up. You have a lot more impacts. The maintenance goes way up. The controversy goes way up. You have to evaluate alternatives. And one of the major flaws here is that the city and WIDA refused to look at any alternative that actually went into the marina that wouldn't require a breakwater, a new structure out on the water, the fill and the like. The ferry operation that ran in after the Loma Prieta earthquake for about 6 weeks, I believe it was, came in there. We just said, well, it'll take 4 minutes longer. We can't do that. So I don't think that makes it through regulatory process.
And Carol Denny, I think, responded to that too, saying that but you say it, Carol, it's a habitat.
Right. Waterfront, the shoreline itself is crucial habitat that
I didn't know that.
when people talk in a cavalier fashion about additional parking, I cringe. I really want people who haven't enjoyed walking the shoreline down there to do that and see how priceless, how precious this is. It's part of the flyway. There are opportunities to see things that you can't see anywhere else. And I think what we have out there is precious, and the loss for people who only see the opportunity to monetize it somehow. As a matter of fact, if you really want to monetize it, you would never go for a ferry. Never. Never. I don't know what you would do, but you would not do that. So I just had to say that. Thanks for the opportunity.
So I see a comment from Claudia, and back before WIDA was WIDA, and when it was the WTA, and I knew the executive director of that, they were looking at a ferry operation from essentially the foot of Gilman. Again, that was very controversial for exactly the reasons that Carol has mentioned. You're cutting into high quality habitat. I mean, if I've kayaked along all of this shoreline, there's egrets of various sizes. You haven't lived until you've seen a great blue heron land on the evergreen tree next to the yacht club, right at the very top. And I mean, they make a lot of noise in there. And so all of this is sensitive habitat, and all of this is subject to the regulatory process. So, there is land down there, and there's land where parking might be possible, but it's also going to eventually flood as sea level rises. Carol, you got another question from the chat, or shall I go to the screen?
The screen has David Fraser, Michael Warburton, Vivian Fire.
Okay, let's start with David.
Yes, I am David Fraser. I own a boat in the marina, and I'm also a very active member of Cal Sailing, teaching quite regularly at different levels. First of all, I'd like to just comment that the notion that people are not going to drive or are going to carpool or are going to take public transportation is pretty silly. I think if you have 2,000 people on a ferry, you're going to have probably 1,800 cars. Secondly, I'm curious if anybody can speak to the unity or lack of unity among the Berkeley City Council. I know that 3 members just published a piece about the enormous progress that they've been making. And third, I would like to get some idea in terms of opposition to this whole fiasco. What can somebody tell us? What were the keys that made the Cesar Chavez opposition to development there, aside from having a good cause? But what institutionally or structurally did they do? Because I think the problem in our case is that there seems to be a lot of very dedicated people, but I don't see much of a formal structure. Jim, I don't know about the one that you've started, so I may be completely off base. But I would like to know both about the city council and also how Cesar Chavez succeeded in opposition.
So I can answer those 2 questions. The city council's 9-0 on this. This is the juice behind this is real estate money. It's kind of the old, the same developer mania. One of the things that's interesting is that it's either Prop S, SF, or Tide Lines is in fact a transportation mitigation for one of the San Mateo County developments for biotech. And our billionaire bros, they all see one guy with something and they want one, and they don't want to pay for it. So the Genetec is paying the subsidy to run that ferry. It's part of their EIR requirements. They would love to turn that over just like Ron Cowan did, so that they don't have to continue to subsidize it. But that is the juice behind it. There's a lot of biotech going on in West Berkeley, and they're contributing to council members, and they're behind the ferry because they can run a shuttle and it'll make their EIR easy. That doesn't get it through BCDC. In fact, if you ask why there is a state agency or a regional agency like BCDC, it's because real estate has untoward influence in local governments. So we've started Save the Berkeley Pier. I would love to have everyone here go to that. What was successful in the fight against overdeveloping Cesar Chavez was 900 signatures. And the council looked at that and they just said, okay. So we're only up to about 100. So we got 800 to go. Vivian?
If you do the Berkeley Pier, what do you do about projected sea level rise?
It's an interesting question. So in the very long term, remember, I'm a coastal engineer and I've been working on sea level rise since first McGrath was 1983. Over the 75 to 100 year time frame, most of the marina will eventually be underwater. But most of it will also be useful for recreational purposes for 50 to 75 years. So it's one of those, eventually it will be a stranded asset, but right now it's not. And you know, if you do the numbers right, I think investment on something that will give you your citizens pleasure for 50 years is warranted. So that's my take on it. Others may draw a different conclusion.
Michael, and then Vivian.
Yeah, I apologize for missing the early part of this, but doesn't the state of California have some public trust responsibilities along the shoreline? And Carol Denny talks about the crucial habitat. Isn't that a public trust resource? And is the Berkeley mayor allowed to give the public trust away?
Well, you know, Michael, I know you're interested in the trust, and you're one of the lions. I've been a public trustee for about 50 of the last years in different venues. A ferry terminal is consistent with the public trust. It is a trust use. It is a commerce use. It is a commercial use. It's not a wise use in the sense of the amount of money that you have to invest, but it is consistent. The same thing.
Is money a public trust?
Any money generated by public trust leases must remain in the trust. So if we take the DoubleTree, the money generated, the 2.2 million that they generate in lease revenue must remain in the trust. But the 4.7 million that they generate in TOT doesn't have to. That's more a question of, is the city competently managing its resources so that they stay valuable? My answer to that is obvious. Hell no.
Yeah, and it's time. I mean, people see this constitutional crisis and they wonder whether Donald Trump had a criminal enterprise or whether he stole the election fair and square. Why can't people just talk about the public trust? Because, you know, with the development on the Shell Mound, for example, you have landmarks, you have parks, you have indigenous rights, and then Ellsworth, I guess, says it's a real estate problem, and apparently Jesse Arreguín agrees with him. Is that the way it goes?
You know, so I ran the campaign against Measure L, not because I'm an anti-tax person, but because there were no boundaries on it. Jesse did most of the fundraising. He raised about, what was the number, 488,000, most of it from pay-to-play people. And we raised 43,000, 38,000, but we managed to prevail. That was because there was a 2/3 requirement. I don't know what would happen on an election on the ferry. It's going to be tougher. The easier thing to do, I think, is fight it in the permit system and in the EIR system. But probably we're going to have to generate a fair amount of money and fight them in court. Because
well, why does the legal profession want to give away the public trust? Do they think
Money's
they
fun-
can?
Money's fungible. I mean, I think we agree on this, but let's move on. Vivian, you've been very patient.
Thank you. I really appreciate your presentation and your expertise. My question is a little tangential or more regional. I live in Richmond, and here we have 32 miles of shoreline and similar issues around.
Yay, Bruce. And track.
So
Richmond Trail Activity Committee. Yes.
So you're answering my question before I asked it. It's Bruce Bayard.
Bruce Bayard.
Yeah, I'm asking who I might network with, who has similar knowledge around Richmond in particular.
Oh, Bruce and Nancy Twiss have been. Richmond has been extremely successful. I served on the Bay Trail board with Bruce. He's a regional treasure, and he is. You know, we have these people like Bruce, like Sylvia, like Phyllis Faber. They're people that I've worked with and I just adore. So Bruce is the man.
Okay. Thank you.
You didn't tell them that you live on the shoreline.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't live on the shoreline.
She does
No.
Yeah.
in Richmond.
I live on the beach and there are many issues. I live around the corner from Bruce.
Point Richmond is an interesting little place. I love going out there on my bicycle, and when I'm feeling good, I go up over the hill instead of through the tunnel. But it's an amazing place, and if we build these thousands of units, this whole region is going to be a different place.
Yeah.
I don't see any other raised hands here. How about in the chat, Carol?
Let me go to the chat and see.
It says one of these things, it says, Jim mentioned the WSP, and doesn't approval of that mean approval for the ferry?
No. So the first of all, before the city can adopt the waterfront specific plan, they must go through an EIR process. And the first step on that is the scoping session. So out in the field is my buddy David Fielder. We're both still just barely young enough to windsurf. And in 2008, I believe it was, WIDA proposed a ferry, and they prepared one of the worst EIRs I've ever seen. It didn't notice that there was a city plan that applied to the area that they did and the like. So they never finalized that EIR. We killed it with comments. One of the difficulties that they have is that under the Federal Transportation Act, you cannot use federal transportation money for a transportation facility if there are any practicable alternatives. So WIDA and the city have refused to look at alternatives in any level. And that will be the battle in the EIR. I spent the last 3 years while this has been going on preparing for what's the first stage in preparation of an EIR, scoping comments. I mean, I used to do this on the other side, right? I used to run the environmental programs for the Port of Oakland. The difference was I talked to the opposition a lot. I mean, I put together a dredging project that restored habitat, and I said we can just roll you. So I have a little different approach, but they will require an EIR, and we'll all have an opportunity to say, oh no, you've got it wrong. Got to look at this. So unless the real estate powers that be manage to completely eliminate CEQA, the city still has to go through that.
So we do have more chat information and questions here. One is, who wants this ferry? Does the governor want it? It seems all the data are against it and there's no real market. What is the justification?
You know, it's hard to know the motives of people. You can suspect them. One of the things that's going on, and it's going on in Berkeley in big time, is you're going to have 3 council members running for office. And Berkeley is kind of addicted to other people's money. So the idea of being able to have some kind of an event out there where you say, we've solved the emergency problems, we've solved the congestion problems, and you're going to have a cushy ride to San Francisco if you just ride your bike down to the ferry. And I did it, says Rigel. I did it, says Jesse. I did it, says Terry. I did it, says Rashi. You just can't underestimate that. I mean, after running the T1 campaign, I spent 3 years, 4 years, 6 years trying to steer that money to projects that made sense and trying to get public input and criteria. And, you know, it was just really a lot of hard work. I've been to a lot of ribbon cutting. So those things are popular. Those are ways that those are things you put in your newsletter. So the ferry has a shelf appeal. I mean, I took my grandkids on the ferry to San Francisco. They got a sense of why I love the Bay. They got a sense of why I've worked for 50 years to protect the Bay. They were there, wind in their face, little diesel emissions. But they got the sense. You can get the same thing for free on the pier. So to me, spending at least 30 and maybe 60 million that they don't have on a ferry, and then pumping 6 million a year into subsidy doesn't make any sense. But since they're all going to be someplace else by the time those decisions are made, get newsletters like Rigel's. Rigel also claimed it's sustainable. It's going to be electric. I mean, it has 19 times the CO2 emissions per passenger of a bus. First Amendment lets him say things like that.
So there's a couple of people who've asked in the chat, how do they get a hold of the signatures to sign? Okay, so we have, and I think David did put in the link to our website. Send us an email. We are collecting signatures. I have, and I will print out, Save the Berkeley Pier Community Petition. We, the undersigned, strongly support the rebuilding of the closed Berkeley Pier for future recreational use and a return to its public free and iconic place in San Francisco Bay. You can send me a personal email, and McGrath@comcast.net. So it's my last name and my grandfather's nickname, Mac McGrath@comcast.net. I spent a lot of time answering emails and trying to organize. So, you know, the comment earlier, I believe it was, who was it? I quit taking notes as well as I should have. That we're not as well organized is absolutely true. I've been waiting until we actually saw what the city proposes in the plan, and I haven't had a chance to look at what they put out today. We will have an ask, and if you contact us directly, I will suggest some talking points for the city council meeting. Take a look at the document yourself, and the rationale behind it. Don't take my word for it. I freely admit I have a bias.
recreations. I've built parks. So I don't want to see one destroyed. And there's a public session on the 23rd in the marina at Shorebird Park. There'll be storyboards. It'll be spun. Oh my God, will it be spun? But so be it. Make up your own mind. I'm just one person.
Jim, this is David Fraser again. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to know, following up, I think, David Janinis's chat point. So if we are saving the pier, are we also opposing the ferry, or are those two things that require two organizational separate entities to pursue?
That may be the best question and the most difficult question that's been asked all night. So I have perhaps a little cocky sense that I can kill the ferry, and I might be wrong. But in any event, when most of us who are involved in the steering committee of Save the Berkeley Pier are adamantly opposed to the ferry. But we tried to articulate something that was a positive message rather than a negative message. And I stole Nancy Skinner's line. She said it used to be possible to walk out onto the pier, get into the middle of the bay without having a boat. And I so completely agree with that sense. The city sent a shill from the Visit Berkeley group down to one of the public meetings. And I believe it was Kelly Hammergan just charmed the socks right off of him. And he admitted that he had proposed to his wife on the pier. It is that kind of place. And Kelly has that kind of charm. So it is an iconic place. And so it's our effort to really have a positive message. But if we have to go to court, we'll ask you all for money.
All right, we have very little time left, but I want to read a few more comments in the chat. One is, these are strung together a little bit. What about the 40 acres that Berkeley owns at the racetrack once it is vacated? Secondly, that said, Golden Gate Fields Racetrack has a lot of parking and it's an alternate terminal site that should be taken seriously. When new city, and another one was when new city manager Keene under Shirley Dean suggested lucrative high rises at the marina, it took only one public word from one council member to quench the entire concept. In those days, the respect for environmental concerns was thorough. So Jim mentioned the WSP and doesn't approve of that. Mean approval for the fair. Okay.
I think I answered that one.
You did. Okay. So let's just whatever briefly you can say. And our next meeting will try to be about the racetrack in Albany. So if we don't get a full answer on this now, we'll try to cover it in our next meeting. Because I promised we'd stop at 9, which is a minute from now or so.
Well, I did see Rochelle in the audience at the beginning, and this picture is from Albany Beach, the picture behind me, and it's not me, it's Andrew Sullivan, one of our members, and his daughter took that as they were paddling back at sunset. It's just very, very lovely. So 40 acres of the racetrack, the stables is in Berkeley, the rest is in Albany. None of it is designated for any kind of development at the moment. So a planning process will have to start. It'll take at least a year or two. We will certainly comment on an EIR that they must consider alternatives to Berkeley, and that's one of them. But parts of that are going to be high and dry through 100 years of sea level rise, but the parking lot on the north is not. Virtually all of that is subject to flooding. It's an old marsh.
We've covered a lot of territory today and had a great discussion. Thank you, everybody, very, very much for your participation. And thank you, Jim, for all the work that you've been doing for all of us.
Thank you, Carol, for inviting me, and thanks to everybody for listening so politely. I usually put people to sleep at these things. All right. A rare audience.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
This was wonderful.
Thank you.